Hello, everyone. We're so happy you're with us. I'm going to start us off today for our Beyond the Shelf Insights Teams Empowering Retail and CPG Excellence. My name is Polly Spiros. I'm the CRO at Fuel Cycle. In today's dynamic market, CPG and retail companies have to navigate shifting consumer preferences. And now this is further complicated by growing economic uncertainty and tariff impacts. And our latest research reveals alarming changes in consumer sentiment, including reduced spending, recession fears, indecision, and some long-term financial concerns. And in turbulent times, customer intimacy becomes mission critical. Not just understanding what consumers are doing, but why. Insights teams play a critical role in making sense of this volatility that we are experiencing and aligning strategy with evolving needs, strengthening consumer relationships. These are all challenges that CPG and retail insights leaders are facing today. And I'm joined by three of those leaders who it's my pleasure to kind of share this webinar with. And all three have deep experience in CPG and retail, and I'm very excited for a timely discussion on how to leverage insights to drive clarity, resilience, and growth among the disruption that we're seeing in our markets. So I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Sarah, I'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Snudden. I've been in the consumer insights space for quite a while now. I came up through cleaning products and food storage at Clorox. So I started cleaning toilets and taking out the trash. And I currently work in the coffee space. I spent a while at Keurig, and now I'm at JDE Peet's working on some brands we're bringing to the US from Europe.
Thanks for being with us. Catherine?
Hi, Catherine Fox. I'm currently the brand director of licensing and branding for Wellspun. I've actually got 20 years experience in packaging development and took a switch to go to the brand partner side. I manage the day-to-day brand licenses that Wellspun has here under Bedding and Bath, as well as managing our wonderful community with a Fuel Cycle.
Good to be with you, Catherine. Dawn?
Yeah, hi. I'm Dawn Sloan. I am the director of customer experience here at Fuel Cycle. I lead the retail and CPG sector here at Fuel Cycle. I've been in the market research space for 25 years. I've been working with some of the biggest brands in both retail and consumer packaged goods. I started my career at a smaller copy testing company, worked my way up through my love of brand and communications. I've sat on both sides of the table as a vendor and as also as a client. Consumer insights and the brands that are fueled by them are my priority at Fuel Cycle, and I'm super excited to be here today.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be in your company, all of you. Thanks for joining us today on this webinar. Let's go ahead and dive in. We definitely want this to be complete before the hour, and I know that we will run out of time. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And so I'd like to first, Dawn, pitch it to you. You've done some research recently in consumer sentiment in this sort of market of volatility. Can you share a little bit of what you learned during those studies? I think Dawn may have.
We're seeing a clear trend in consumer sentiment.
Go ahead, Dawn. I think you
Sorry.
froze for a second. No worries. Go right ahead.
Okay, we're seeing a clear trend in consumer sentiment. We looked at the University of Michigan's survey of consumers, and according to that, the consumer confidence has declined for the fourth month in a row, down 11% since March. We ran a research study, as you mentioned, that echoes that same shift. In our recent study, our economic outlook among the general pop consumers was, we saw that like nearly 2/3 describe the current economic conditions as poor or very poor. And that's having a real impact on everyday spending. What was especially striking was how widespread this cautious behavior, consumer behavior is. We saw that it's showing up across all demographics, while those with higher incomes or more education express slightly less concern. The broader pattern is absolutely consistent. Consumers are becoming more deliberately and discerning of their purchases. So no matter what the category, they're watching their pennies, they're counting their pennies, and they're being very cautious in this economic environment.
So how are you seeing this play out, not only among consumers, but among your clients? I'm curious, how does it shape Insight's priorities?
It's a great question. What I would say is that because of this shift in economic outlook, our clients are doubling down on insights. We've seen that they're relying more than ever on consumer data to inform everything from messaging to product positioning, knowing that every decision needs to be grounded in deep understanding of how people are navigating today's economic reality.
So I'm following up on that. There is a lot of emotional volatility in the market right now. And Sarah, what I'd love to hear is how are you identifying which sentiment shifts are temporary because of this volatility, and perhaps which signals are indicating long-term behavioral change?
Sure. In the space that I work in now, which is coffee, there's one of the first signals you see in economically challenging times is how people trade off around the coffee shop experience. Because, buying that coffee on the go costs a little bit more than what you could do at home. Realistically, it costs a lot more than what you could do at home. And then it's sort of thinking about how you position as a company that sells is my particular work is focused on the at-home experience, thinking about how we position that to be what people are looking for. And obviously for some, you have to be really clear that they're looking for just getting a coffee job done. Like they want the caffeine, they want the energy. For others, they're really looking to replicate kind of a cafe experience at home and being clear about who we're talking to and what job they're trying to do, both rationally and in terms of the steps they take, but also emotionally in terms of what they're trying to add into their life is really, really important. So I think in terms of the short versus longer term, I think listening closely to your consumer helps you navigate that because you can tell where there's more friction of making a trade-off versus where it's an easier exchange. And parts just listening over time, you really sense who's most committed and who's kind of just having more of an immediate reaction to what's happening around them.
So I love the way you said, get the coffee job done. So there are still jobs to be done, so to speak. This is the coffee
Yeah.
job. But you also shared trade-offs. So what we're seeing, you're suggesting we're seeing some trade-offs between maybe going to a coffee shop, trying to recreate that cafe experience at home. That makes a lot of sense. So we're really looking at trade-offs as one of the trends
Mhm.
that might continue. Catherine, have you experienced in your kind of your space the same sort of trade-offs or decision making that mirrors
I
the
have to
coffee?
100% agree with Sarah. Yes. I think that, you know, you have brand loyalty. Um, but if it's not in the budget for somebody, it's not in the budget. So I think being intentional about some of our research studies going forward, like shorter surveys, maybe pulse check-ins. I absolutely adore the pulse check-ins. So I think that that's actually getting a better, quicker answer from our community in the moment right now. Because the unknown is unknown just yet. So that's where I think that we're
Yeah,
gonna
so
need them.
Catherine, you're saying one of the things that you leverage your community audience is you will do quick
Hmm.
check-ins on sentiment. Now, I have a question for you about now you're kind of more in a more durable purchase than
Hmm.
coffee, for example. And you had said that you're still seeing brand loyalty. During our
Hmm.
pandemic, we experienced significant consumer shift. We don't know if we're going to see consumer shift in the same ways that we did during the COVID pandemic. But I'm curious, do you believe that these consumer shifts are going to be permanent or are they temporary? Because a trade-off suggests that it might be, I'm not going to switch brands. I'm going to hold off on this purchase. So I'm curious about your opinion on that.
I think COVID was our first test. So I think, everybody was home. So that honestly, it drove our business exponentially only because everybody wanted to make their home as comfortable and homey as possible. So I do kind of feel like that, right now, not so much of a trade-off, but maybe a hold on, what that purchase is. I do think that, the resolve, what that customer needs it to do is also going to be top of mind. So we always go into the health and, kind of wellness take on, home textiles. So I do think that there'll be a shift, but I don't think it's going to be for long. I really don't.
Mhm. So there's the coffee job, there's the sleeping linens job.
Mhm.
Dawn, have you now you're working with customers really across a spectrum
Yeah.
of retail and CPG brands. Have you seen trade-offs, indecision that are occurring now that are really different than what you're seeing sort of in the business as usual marketplace?
I think so. Yeah, we have many customers that are asking that very question of their consumer base. What are the trade-offs that they're willing to make? How will that impact their business? How can they adjust pack size? How can they adjust what they're doing in order to still keep that customer at home in terms of keeping them loyal to their brand? But understanding that, yeah, absolutely trade-offs are happening and having the consumer insights gathered in order to make the best decisions around those choices that they know that their consumers are making.
Thank you. So moving on to these customer relationships, Catherine, you mentioned, for example, you like to do these sort of quick pulses to understand longitudinally how customers are shifting. Are they trading off? How do you build a sense of connection and belonging with your brand? I mean, especially when consumers are pulling back or perhaps feeling overwhelmed.
Mhm. I think that there's so much information out there, and I think it's being intentional, especially regarding packaging. So what we say on the package is your first kind of grab that customer. So I think, we've actually done a survey with Fuel Cycle regarding packaging, and it's being clear communication about what's on that package, whether it's even online, our A+ content, Um, I also think less is more. So if we can get to that direct primary point that that customer needs, that, decision-making driver, um, of the features and benefits for home textiles, at least, it is clearer. And I think that that's where we should be leading towards.
Sarah, you have done quite a bit, like longitudinal looking at customers over dimensions, over time, over occasion. How are you building a sense of connection and belonging when customers may be making different decisions than they would be making in a sort of a more normalized marketplace?
Yeah, one of the most interesting things about coffee is while I firmly believe that people can find the behaviors or the brands they connect with no matter what their age or experience is, there is a generational cohort element to how people choose their brands. Oftentimes, younger people don't want the brands that are brands for them that were their parents' brands. Sometimes they do. And thinking about sort of the reality of people who are more boomers grew up with hot in a pot. So that's how they got to know coffee, and that shapes their overall relationship. And they can evolve from there, and that's really interesting to hear those stories. But then you get Gen X. Some of them look very much like the boomers, and some were the original coffee shop people who were out before Starbucks and Dunkin' and McCafe were everywhere. You get the millennials with the older ones kind of coming in through caramel macchiatos and hot drinks, and then you got the younger ones coming in through frappuccinos and ice drinks. And I'm really curious right now how Gen Z is going to start to pick their brands, because it's wild to me to see like Dunkin' and some of those brands kind of start to look a little bit maybe more like my parents' coffee. And so that dynamic of how people choose their relationships over time is something that evolves within individuals, but also within kind of those groups. And right now, as we look at people who are coming into coffee almost entirely through iced, what that means and how we bring brands to life for them, especially brands that are European that maybe don't think about ice in the same way. It gives us a lot of good work to do.
That's phenomenal. I mean, it's really interesting to understand also, which groups are even impacted by. Maybe there may be some groups that are really less impacted by any kind of market volatility. They really are just making their choices day in, day out. Because what we have seen in some of the things I've read is that there are segments of the population, and it may be particular socioeconomic levels that they're really not impacted at all. They're not changing their sentiment. They're not changing their, kind of their outlook. I don't know, Dawn, if you saw anything in the study or the studies that you've consulted, are there segments of the population, whether that be Gen Z, millennials, are they seeing the volatility differently? Are they even detecting a change in decision making?
Yeah, I think when we looked at the data, we saw that those with higher education, higher income were less impacted. They were still impacted. Some of their decisions were being impacted. They just still had somewhat of a negative outlook, maybe not as negative as some other populations. But then, whenever you looked a little bit closer and you looked demographically at males versus females, females were disproportionately giving us lower scores related to their economic outlook. Younger audiences also having a disproportionate outlook. So, yeah, absolutely, demographics plays into some of that, as both Catherine and Sarah said. Absolutely, there are decisions that are being made differently depending on which generation you are.
One of the trade-offs that we look at through market data and other pieces of what's happening in the market and how consumers play it back is, the role of instant versus ground coffee versus other forms. And, if you can get more directly to an iced coffee creation via instant without having to go all the way to hot coffee to get to iced, and thinking about what that means and how that space evolves with also the reality of thinking about as a value proposition, it looks different. So just being aware of how people navigate forms, and you can see the purchase dynamics through an IRI or a Nielsen, but really getting the stories behind what people are doing is something that I feel like is really important with our community.
That's really interesting. I wonder, do you, Catherine, find that the buying journey is slightly different? I mean, what Sarah just described is, can we get to an iced without having to go to coffee to come back? Is there a faster way there, more convenient way there? Are you seeing anything like that in durable goods or home textiles? Anything like that where they're making a choice that maybe it is faster, more convenient, truncates their buying journey?
Yes. I mean, honestly, even speaking for myself, if I can get it faster on Amazon, I'm gonna go there. But I think also to durable like home sheets, towels. I think these are items that people are purchasing for a long period of time. Like, so it's not like an everyday purchase like coffee. I think these are more, I mean, I would hope investment pieces. Obviously they do have a lifespan, but I, 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 I don't necessarily think that we're going to see that just yet. But time will tell.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, Catherine, is there anything you're doing or trying to understand, in a time when consumers are potentially, we don't know, but
Mhm.
potentially financially stressed, emotionally cautious. We're
Mhm.
seeing that in some of the business industry, indecision, what we call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the marketplace. What does it take to create a research experience that makes them feel really comfortable and engaged and valued and willing to participate? Engagement is a challenge in market research. I mean, when you have
Mhm.
a cohort that is a high quality sample set, they're vetted. You want to make sure that that group stays engaged, comfortable, continuing to participate in research engagements. What are some ways that you have really tried to continuously engage your respondents?
And I think I learned so much coming out of, COVID from this. I now know that, our community can get exhausted, even talking about the same thing multiple times, even in a survey. So I kind of feel like frequency, timing of activities, but I think also adding some sort of feedback as well to the community helps. So whether it's in a discussion group, and it's entertaining to see how many of our community does answer everything. But I mean, they also answer each other. So it is enjoyable to see that there is a community of people that out there that love home textiles. And they're passionate about it, and it's an open forum to talk about. And I use this for this, or I've done this, and I do think that as long as we're mindful about not fatiguing everybody about the same topic, it's all beneficial.
We've learned that that respondents they continue to engage members of a community or on a panel. They continue to engage when there's a few things, right? When there's an interesting topic, obviously something that they have affinity for. When there's some remuneration of some kind, but then also the kind of sharing of responses to understand where they are on the selection spectrum, how they feel about a particular brand, whether there's a fidelity to that brand or a segment. What kinds of feedback response do you do so that you give respondents an opportunity to understand how they are, how their responses fit in with kind of a larger cohort?
Yes. So when I usually do a larger sort of kind of survey with the community, I like to actually present them back with a share back, which your wonderful design team will make for me. And it and it's just
Our
a one
audience experience
pager.
team, yeah.
Yeah. And it is honestly to get the responses like, well, this is great. I see that my voice came through, and I'm glad that I could help you with this. We also do user study tests. And everybody likes to get free stuff sometimes.
So like an almost like an iHUD or a home
Yeah.
use type. Yeah, that's interesting. Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah, that's especially with linens or textiles. Who doesn't love that? Sarah, how about you? What kinds of ways do you continue to engage your respondents to help them feel comfortable continuing to engage, continuing to have an affinity for the space that you're conducting your research?
Sure. I think having the variety of methods where it also helps them feel like they're not just doing the same kind of things over and over. So we've been increasingly using more qual kind of connections where they feel like they're really engaging in a different way, where they pick up their phone and share clips of them answering certain questions. And I think that's been something in our community that's gotten a lot of excitement. But I think sometimes also we'll come to them with examples that we might have picked up on social listening to get their take. And then it really feels like we're asking them for a different amount of kind of they're kind of, narrating what they see from their perspective in the category. I think at the core, we try to think about it as a real relationship and a real conversation. And that as a guide helps it feel more intuitive in terms of how you're connecting, how you're being heard. For sure, the sharebacks, like Catherine said, are good when there's something we can say, you helped make these decisions, or you're, combined, most of you liked this and some of you didn't, is all really helpful. And I mean, sometimes they play back that they see different packages in market or different things that they felt like they helped build. And that's always fun too.
I think it's really interesting what you both have said, because I think it kind of narrows down or boils down into authenticity.
Yeah.
In a community, you have the opportunity to engage with the same people multiple times. And building authenticity of your brand in connection with the community that you've built, I think is really important. I think in what I've seen, in my time at Fuel Cycle is that when the community is really treated as an extension of the brand and not just a platform to execute surveys, I think when that feeling of community is embraced, and again, as an extension of the team, you get really powerful, insightful data, and the community really is enjoying the product of what they're giving you. And so I love it whenever I see clients really take that extra step, and it's certainly something that we want to encourage all of our clients to embrace. And so I just love it whenever it does happen. And I would say that both of your communities are examples of that, where your members have really seen their participation as an extension and an engagement with your brand authentically. I can't even speak.
Authenticity.
Yes,
Sometimes
thank
it's
you.
easy to say a word and it comes so freely, and the others, it's
Yeah,
like you can't get it. Yeah, I can't wrap it around.
thank you.
So, so Don, let's stay with you for a second. You mentioned about an extension of your brand, and that drives strategic insights. But here you have an insights team. Like maybe they have a community, maybe they don't. But insights teams, I think, all are challenged with having that connection between strategic business decision making and the insights that we're able to surface from our either communities, our private online panels. So, how can insights teams position themselves as indispensable to strategic decision making, especially when the stakes are high and the conditions are rapidly changing? What kinds of ways can insights teams have an impact on strategic decision making?
Another great question, Polly. In my experience, I've seen some insights teams make themselves indispensable in strategic decision making, especially when the stakes are high and conditions are changing rapidly. It's when they focus on proactive engagement by anticipating the needs of those decision makers and keeping those decision makers updated so that decision makers would be leadership. I think the best advice that I can give is to fuel data driven decisions with robust analytics, making sure that you have the power behind the data so that it can stand on its own. That also includes the importance of ensuring accuracy and transparency to build trust and credibility in the data that you're providing so that you can make informed decisions. When we concentrate on those types of things, I think the insights teams can demonstrate their essential role in consumer insights, and how important it is that it plays that strong role in decision making.
Sarah, Catherine, any comments on helping teams become indispensable to strategic decision making in your organizations?
Yeah, I would say in the organizations that I've worked for across time, there's a principle of consumer closeness that's really at the core of all strategy. Really thinking about how you can get your brand experience to be the gift of understanding that gives something back in consumers' lives or plays a role that they seek to fill. Um, I think there's different ways that that comes about, but on a strategic level, there's the reality of really being clear about, like I mentioned earlier, the jobs to be done, both the functional and the emotional piece, which is harder to get out of a basic quantitative survey. It really helps to know people and see that relationship over time. But there's also a lot of tactical guidance that as you have a strategy with certain tactics underneath and you're trying to bring to life packaging like Catherine was talking about, or you're trying to bring the right communications behind a big launch, thinking about how to get that guidance and also understand it in the context of what other brands in your space are doing and how they're maybe solving similar challenges differently is super important in a dynamic marketplace. So and that's really the world a lot of us are hustling in.
Yeah. Catherine, any inputs on that from I mean, your manufacturing supply chain is a little longer than coffee, I would think. I could be wrong there, not sure.
I was going to say, I don't know.
I don't
Maybe
know.
It starts
not.
on a mountain
Maybe
with
not.
a,
I mean, you start with the coffee bean, so that could be a really
yeah.
long supply chain. Yeah, sure.
Um, I think for us, it's more of understanding how people want to feel and, getting to comfort, self-care, value. Obviously, there's these shifts. So you'll have behavior shifts in even purchasing. It's needs versus wants. Um, I do have the same sentiments as Dawn and Sarah shared, so I think we are all on the same page here.
Yeah. Yeah. Sarah, you've had a lot of different experiences, and you and I have had conversations about surprising strategic insights that are surfaced from insights that maybe you wouldn't have expected. But I
Yeah.
would love for you to share an example where customer insights directly influenced a major strategic decision in response to maybe a shifting market dynamic or a consumer sentiment.
Yeah, I think probably my favorite and biggest example of this was the reality when you survey the general population about what they want in a cleaning product, the answer you're likely to hear back is a light, fresh scent. And so if you're a brand like Pine Sol, that would take you Pine Sol has a really strong scent that you would not describe as light and fresh. And so I think when I think back on like what that brand was doing and sort of how they were anticipating this trend that was happening as Swiffer and a lot of the P&G products were coming out with these truly lighter, fresher scents, they went out and did a deep dive with their heavy users. And it was really mind blowing to get to know them in that way because for them, cleaning was this badge value and that strong scent and what it said about them and how they ran their house and how they kept their ship tight was really notable. And if had they gone down the Gen Pop answer, they would have missed the whole insight behind their product experience, which is, kind of a blam of scent, like a really strong, powerful scent was what those people wanted. And thinking about how you bring to life those different needs across a market space where that isn't maybe the majority, but it's a really important smaller group that wants something different. And I think
Yeah,
for
and
me,
messaging would be different, and identifying those, right, those
yeah,
consumers would be different. That's a great
yeah.
example. Catherine, Dawn, anything that you can recall, an example of an insight that was surfaced that influenced a major strategic decision in a company, and that was a response to kind of like a shifting market dynamic or consumer sentiment.
For us, I think we use it every day. Since our space is basically the showroom, we sit amongst product and everything's packaged basically. We know that consumers have now about 3 seconds um, to even like glance at your item on, on shelf in store because it's bombarded by everything else. So you need to actually have just exactly what they need right on that package and saying it. So we use our community and we get those, features and benefits that they need. So top of mind, it's softness, material fiber, durability. Um, and then last night, price is always sort of, the fourth runner up.
Interesting. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
I think another great example is when you think about the reality of how people clean. Disinfecting is a great one where it's like there's some people that are very proactive about it that really have like a philosophy and it's part of how they keep their world, the way they want it. And there's other people who are much more reactive about it and like an illness has come into the house and they're engaging in a different way and really understanding those stories and those occasions because sometimes the behavior of wiping something down looks exactly the same but being able to get that relationship closeness in terms of what does clutter mean versus what is clean, what is a premium experience with a coffee drink versus a not premium experience. Like all of those things are very nuanced, and getting clear about who you're talking to is as important as getting the takeaway right.
Mhm.
And I think that applies to so many consumer packaged goods. For example, you have the acute need, like something has happened, you need to clean. We're using cleaning products, but you can also
Sure, yeah.
look for a wellness product. It's an acute need. Next, maintenance. Is there a maintenance aspect? And then finally, is there an occasion that they're responding to or preparing for? So I think that you're spot on. There are dimensions of need, use, and preference, and understanding those dimensions over time really, I think, really help build the understanding of the consumer. And I remember during COVID, I was hosting a webinar, not much different than this one, and I remember saying, are your leaders and your company asking what's going to stick? What are the trends that are going to stick? And I remember one of my our guests said, I don't have a crystal ball, but I know the consumer. I know how they respond, and I know how they react based on evidential work. And that really struck with me that you don't have a crystal ball and you don't know how market volatility will play out, but you know how consumers behave, respond, and preferences if, as an insights function, you're really on as an ongoing basis doing your methodical research. Dawn, any comments on examples of, times that a consumer insight led to a strategic decision-making play in a company, in one of your client companies?
Yeah, I think, in my career, there's one that really stands out. I've worked across a number of categories. One really stands out, though. It was in the infant nutrition space.
Mm.
And it was specifically for infant nutrition that was tube fed because the child had such an intense reaction to traditional methods of, nursing or eating. And doctors are very hesitant, as you can imagine, getting from breast to bottle to tube, and they don't want to go to the extreme very quickly. And to the parent who we were doing IDIs with, the parents were like, I need you to make that shift as quickly as possible, because as a parent, I feel like I'm a failure because I'm not able to feed my child properly. So when we uncovered that insight and were able to take it back to the brand and work with them on their positioning and their messaging, so that when they're working with doctors, to help the doctor understand that there's a balance between, yes, you want to go as slow as possible to make sure that the child is accepting the right amount and the right kind of nutrition given their sensitivities, and weighing that with the mother's or the parent's intense feeling of failure as a parent. You have to take those two things into account, and ultimately making sure that that baby's going to thrive. And so that was very, surprising, I guess, but also just it tugs at your heart as well, knowing that what these families are going through. So I'm a market research nerd. I love data, and having that kind of insight really has always stuck with me.
Thank you. So let's continue on this slide. So, surfacing an insight is one thing, right? Surfacing an insight is what we do. But I am curious, how do what strategies can you deploy that help you ensure that voice of the customer, which we heard from all three of you in different stories and anecdotes. How do you ensure that the voice of the customer doesn't just get surfaced, right? Doesn't just get shared. That's very interesting, but actually meaningfully shapes how leaders in the business think about growth and kind of their next move, and potentially even resilience. What strategies do we deploy as insights leaders to make sure that we are not only surfacing insights, but that they play a role in strategic decision making in the company? Catherine, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Yeah, I think consumer narratives, bringing them up front, and everybody should be perfectly well aware of what actions I'm doing to even get to that point. So I mean, we extensively have conversations here I'm constantly talking to sales, and asking those questions like, what do we need to do? What's the top of mind question that needs to be answered here for your customer? Basically, it's our retailers. And then sharing back all of that stuff, whether depending on the research action that we do, whether it's a sharing of direct quotes, video clips. We actually did a whole Amazon sort of kind of IDI interview with actual Amazon customers, and walk me through your process. How are you making your purchase? What are the things that you are looking at? All of these avenues and direct actions by that customer gives us feedback, gives us ammunition on what to do next. And it is definitely a decision driver for us then. I don't think it gets kind of weighted. I think it is an action point, at least for home Texas.
Yeah, and so I guess what you're suggesting, and if I'm hearing you right, is you're saying, look, these verbatims, this is the voice of the customer that you're hearing. You're hearing the voice of the customer. Now, obviously, a business leader, decision maker, perhaps CMO, CRO, they can't hear all of those voices, right? So you have 30 IDIs. You can't hear. What are the ways that you deploy to get the attention of a leader when you say, this is an insight that you need to pay attention to?
Yes, I mean, I will say that for me here, Wellspun is very much about the person. They are very much emotionally connected to people. So they care about all 30 of those people. But yes, I do give you like little, I'll literally go through it all and I'll share back and be like, hey, these are our 5 points that we have to kind of address. And this is the top of mind right here, all 5 of these.
So you do need to emphasize, not every bullet point is of equal weight, and you kind of need to, because I find that leaders are very busy. They don't have a lot of disposable time to mull through a lot of data. And I think that's one of the reasons why the voice of the customer, IDIs, focus groups are so impactful, because you're hearing your customer. But there's of course very relevant data that is augmented, in those in kind of those multi-phase studies that includes a quantitative aspect too.
Right.
Sarah, how about you? What are ways that you make sure and ensure that the voice of the customer insights make it to leadership, and that leadership understands the perspective so that they can make decisions in the business?
Well, I think there's a few things. There's a lot of kind of boiling down that has to happen, because really the people at the top aren't necessarily out cruising for something interesting and fulfilling to do in terms of getting to know their consumer. Sometimes those are great moments, but it's really about how it's strategically embedded all the way through. So, you start with the earliest kind of narratives that get woven into the communication, that get then tested in market, that get vetted kind of more broadly in the test and learns, and you have the consumer voice to help correct if something's not quite landing how you thought it would. But I think really everything you do in the insights world has to have that implication for action attached to it. The so what, why should I care, has to be made really explicit, and sometimes you have to start with that to get the interest to really take place and take root.
Take root, to get to really listen. Dawn, you mentioned something about proactivity, actually proactively kind of anticipating the needs. Does that play into this, where how do you get their attention? How do you get a leader's attention and help them understand this is important?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I always like the phrase, your agenda is my agenda. If you know what's important to leadership, you know what's important to focus on. And both Catherine and Sarah really touched on the idea of a mixed methodology of research to support that what's important. So using quantitative data, supplementing it with qualitative data to really build out a compelling story. If you build that story based around the things that are important to leadership, it'll always catch their attention. That's been my experience. I've seen other brands do it really successfully. And I think that having, both approaches these wonderful ladies talked about is important to elevating the consumer insights voice, elevating the consumer voice. And I don't know of anyone who's never loved a sizzle reel of your consumer talking about your product. So I think that, like I said, the combination of one, knowing what's important, two, having the quantitative data to validate, and then having the qualitative scissor reel to illustrate it, it's a winning combination in my book.
The sizzle reel. Agreed. I think that that's one of the favorite. It's a favorite. And not only with leaders, but also with investors, kind of end of year, annual report type work. Okay, final round, like lightning round. What what are you doing right now to sort of make sure that your balance of the year insights are going to be helpful to the organization? It's one thing that you're doing now that might be helpful to some of the other insights leaders that might be listening today. I'm going to start, Catherine, with you. One thing, if you could just kind of imparting some advice on how to be prepared for this sort of weird time of maybe indecision or volatility that they could do to make their insights.
I start with emotional, like drive conversations more emotional than tactile. Again, I'm going to repeat the having the open forum and discussion activities, and I mean maybe even we sometimes ask them, take a picture of your bathroom. What towels do you have on? So it is, I mean, a little, you have to get a little kind of cheeky. I hate to say that, but I mean, everybody's a person. So it has to be more of a human touch.
100%.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
seasonal too, right? With
Mhm.
textiles. Sorry, Sarah.
oh no, I was going to say part of what makes it feel more like a longer conversation with the community is you can pick up kind of a thread, or
Mhm.
you can tee up a conversation with a group where like, gosh, I know that you've mentioned you drink this brand every now and then. What are you doing with it now? And it feels good because it's a way of also sharing back or feeding back. Like, we heard you before, we didn't ask you about it right away, but now we're circling
Mhm.
around. And maybe they say, like, oh, yeah, I don't drink that brand anymore. Or, oh, I'm thinking more about this seasonal flavor than that seasonal flavor, or maybe we know they're big pumpkin spice people and we're trying to figure out what the summer thing is going to be,
Right.
or what they're thinking about in that way. So I think part of what makes the community feel more like a conversation, even if it is through surveys, is the retention of those bits that they've already told us, where you don't have to ask them the same things over in the same ways. You're kind of building off where you left off, and that also feels rewarding, I think, to respondents.
And Sarah, you layer those attributes in their profile. Is
Right. I
that
mean, well, because like the whole point of having a community is to remember sort of who's doing what, so that when you're trying to really get maybe tactical guidance or guidance on a communication piece you're trying to do, you know who's kind of identified as the right person for that, or the person who has the need that you're trying to meet with your communication or product or package.
Thank you. Dawn, how about you? One thing.
Yeah, I think that it boils down to authenticity.
Mhm.
Um, really being using your community as an extension of your brand and a way to engage with your brand rather than just a transactional, I have a question for you to answer. Um, that's not who the brands that we work with are. That's not who Fuel Cycle is. And so I'm really proud of that authenticity in the relationships that we foster. And like I said earlier, these two ladies have communities that represent that authenticity, and it's really exciting to see. But authenticity, I think, is the most important key there.
Yeah, well, thank you. This might be a good time to go to questions. I mean, but first I'll say that if you are looking for ways to harness the power of insights and to stay ahead of today's either volatile markets, competitive. The retail and CPG landscape is quite competitive. Well, we'd love to continue this conversation. Those of us at Fuel Cycle who work in communities and work in private online panels, we'd love to continue this conversation after today's webinar. And we'd love to show you how we're partnering with companies like yours to redefine success in the CPG segment. But with that, I'd like to go to our questions. We do have a few. And so I'm going to throw out one that came in. When we think about building relationships with our customers, are you leveraging a more empathetic conversational strategy program to convey to your customers that you are supporting them and are there for them? Or are you just sort of doing business as usual surveying techniques? Is there any more emphasis, I think, on the conversational strategy?
I mean, I think we're always trying to be kind of as in part of a conversation. So while like if you had a good friend, there might be times where they really need support in a different way than another time. But you're not like, oh, we're just casually conversational, versus seriously, like you adapt to where they're at, I think is what I would say. But I think the idea of building that relationship and understanding what it is people are trying to get from the brand experience that they have with your brand is always at the core.
Any other comments on that one?
I agree with Sarah. I also think too that, I even find that there are things that I don't utilize, and I could be. I just don't know how to, proactively, how the community would interact with it. So I kind of stay with, kind of like the three things I like to do. But there are so many other options to do. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I think you feel out your community and you kind of feel how they respond. I know kind of what works for our community. So I kind of do stick to our three kind of, typical things that we do.
Sure.
We have some clients that have been with Fuel Cycle for a decade. They have built a completely wonderful relationship with their members. It's very conversational. It's very sympathetic to what's going on. I can think of one specific client who has led this community under her watch for the full 10 years. And she knows community members by name. She knows what they do for a living. She can tell you everything there is to know about every single member of her community. And so it's definitely, the authenticity that I was mentioning earlier. That is what sets, I think, Fuel Cycle up, different than just your traditional ad hoc research. These are not one-time panelists. They are people who are with your brand in and out, who can really provide insight on what's going on in their world and how their world is impacting their choices around your brand and other brands in your category. So I think it's a little bit different than maybe some of the other traditional methods that we use for market research, but it's all around that, getting to know and having that strong relationship with your consumer.
Yeah, I liked Catherine's example of like, take the picture of what towels are in your bathroom now. Like, I mean, it's that kind of thing, but you've got a sense sort of how you can kind of classify how people navigate their choices and really understand how those different needs or, actions that they're trying to achieve are recognizing something bigger in their life than just like, which one do you like and why? It's towels as part of a whole like expression of you that's your home versus
your lifestyle,
like,
your preferences, your
best
choices,
one.
the way you live. Yeah, absolutely. Last question, and this one's a kind of a doozy. I was debating whether I should bring this one up. So in a time of volatility, we are experiencing some budget compression. What would an insights leader say to leadership who is attempting to reduce insights budget, market research budget in these times where insights is more important than ever? So does anybody have any recommendations for someone who might be experiencing some budget compression, budget
Yeah,
reduction?
I can speak to that because I think the reality of what's happening in the geopolitical landscape right now makes supply chains, really challenged in ways that are hard to figure out. And I would say a community is a lot to bite off, but if you think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish over time and how you can ensure that commitment, I think communities have a really important role that they can play. To be fair, I'm actually very grateful that I have a community in place now because when things are suddenly paused or when things have to be kind of take their moment, there's all of those one-off pieces that you'd be doing to try to understand or learn are
Mhm.
vulnerable in a different way. And I think having that commitment made in advance to consumer
Mhm.
closeness helps in these times because you've got something to navigate. I can actually share an example of some work I was doing when the pandemic hit. I was working on a project on international travel and people's love of international travel, and we had that whole project staged up from going from the qual into a more quantitative assessment. And literally, we got out of field at the end of February 2020 and turned that calendar page, and the whole kind of travel company had to rethink. But we knew so much about why travel was important and what it meant to them that we could pivot because we really understood the role travel played for that brand to kind of come back and be thinking about, how to be the balm that people who had all these big trips planned that now weren't going to happen. And having that relationship really helps you understand the pivot in ways that you can't always anticipate. But in that case, they could do virtual content with some of the people that were on the ground and that were the home country telling you the off the beaten track kind of stuff, and they could bring their brand to life in a really different way. But without that deep understanding, it would have been just that much harder.
And you're saying insights is an investment in resilience when times do go sideways or something and a pivot is required, you're armed with that understanding and that insight. I think you also said the commitment to, for example, community is already made. You can continue research through times of perhaps a reduction in budget when maybe ad hoc. You don't have access to funds to do ad hoc, if I heard you
Yeah,
correctly.
yeah.
Catherine, any comments on that
No,
question?
it is definitely a long game, and it does help you in this time where there is that unknown. So I, and it changes daily. So yes, it is an investment, but I think it's worth it.
Mhm.
So you have to think of like at the longer end goal, not right now, but
Yeah.
everybody's right now.
Yeah, I know, I understand. Okay. Well, this has been a really, really instructive and gratifying conversation. It has been a pleasure being with all of you. It's learning from your deep experience is always something that, has been is helpful to me and I'm sure many others. So, Catherine, Dawn, Sarah, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate you participating in our webinar. For those of you in our audience, thank you for being with us today. And we wish you well, and we wish you the best of, the best of not only luck, but also we wish you well and high performance and in this kind of, time of volatility. It's just it seems that we are all continuing to agree that during these times, that's when you need insights and an investment in understanding your consumer and their sentiments. So thank you, all of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye for now.